Item number 10, resolution declaring opposition to Governor Jared Polis' emergency powers under the COVID-19 pandemic. Madam County Attorney.
Good morning. We are present on item number 10 for resolution declaring opposition to Governor Polis' emergency powers under COVID-19 pandemic. This is a resolution that's being proposed to the Board of County Commissioners declaring opposition to Governor Polis' emergency powers under COVID-19 pandemic. Whereas pursuant to CRS 3011-1011, 3011-103, 3011-1071, and the Board of County Commissioners of El Paso County, Colorado, hereinafter board, has legislative authority to make all contracts and to settle all accounts of the county and to exercise such other and further powers as conferred by law. And whereas the Constitution of the State of Colorado, effective in 1876, is the supreme law of the State of Colorado. And whereas the Constitution of the State of Colorado, Article 2, Bill of Rights, contains the following provisions. First, Section 3, inalienable rights. All persons have certain natural, essential, and inalienable rights, among which may be reckoned the right of enjoying and defending their lives and liberty, of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and of seeking and obtaining their safety and happiness. Section 4, religious freedom. The free exercise and enjoyment of religious profession and worship without discrimination shall forever hereafter be guaranteed, and no person shall be denied any civil or political right, privilege, or capacity on account of his opinions concerning religion. But the liberty of conscience hereby secured shall not be construed to dispense with oaths or affirmations, excuse acts of lascivious, or justify practices inconsistent with the good order, peace, or safety of the state. No person shall be required to attend or support any ministry or place of worship, religious sect, or denomination against his consent, nor shall any preference be given by law to any religious denomination or mode of worship. Section 5, freedom of elections. All elections shall be free and open, and no power, civil or military, shall at any time interfere to prevent the free exercise of the right of suffrage. Section 24, the right to assemble and petition. The people have the right peaceably to assemble for the common good and to apply those invested in powers of government for redress of grievances by petition or remonstrance. Section 25, due process of law. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Whereas the Governor of Colorado possesses authority under the Colorado Disaster Emergency Act, CDEA, to suspend the provisions of any regulatory statute prescribing the procedures for conduct of state business or the orders, rules, or regulations of any state agency if strict compliance with the provisions of any statute, order, rule, or regulation would in any way prevent, hinder, or delay necessary action in coping with the emergency. Whereas the board recognizes that the governor is responsible for meeting the dangers to the state and people presented by disasters and possesses a great deal of authority under the CDEA. And whereas, however, the board also recognizes that CDEA is statutory in law, Colorado, as adopted and passed by the Colorado General Assembly, and statutory law must always yield to the Colorado Constitution. And whereas the board recognizes and supports the governor's disaster declaration as it specifically relates to the COVID pandemic, and whereas while the governor has issued executive orders narrowly tailored to the coping with the COVID-19, he has issued other executive orders with no such direct nexus to coping with COVID-19. And whereas the board has serious concerns that the governor, by way of executive order, unilaterally infringed on the rights of Colorado residents as guaranteed by Article 2 of the Constitution of the State of Colorado by not tailoring his executive orders. Whereas, for instance, the governor continues to affront Article 2, Section 4, and Section 24 of the Constitution of the State of Colorado by not allowing churches and places of worship to reopen despite their willingness and capacity to comply with public health orders and guidance, and by the governor not defining places of worship as essential. And whereas also Executive Order D 2020-64, signed by the governor on May 15, 2020, purports to suspend all requirements of CRS 90-4-901, 9052A, 9055, subsection C5,
This is
9053,
what?
901 1.5, and all relating to the signature collection for unaffiliated and independent candidates, and also authorizes the Colorado Secretary of State's office to promulgate temporary rules for registered electors to receive and return candidate petitions over mail and email. And whereas further Executive Order 2020-65, also signed by the governor on May 15, 2020, purports to similarly suspend various provisions of Title I, Article 40 of the Colorado Revised Statutes related to signature collection for ballot issues, and also authorizes the Secretary of State to promulgate temporary rules for registered electors to receive and return petitions over the mail and email. And whereas both Executive Orders 2020-64 and 65 are unilateral executive suspension of several Colorado statutes as adopted and passed by the Colorado General Assembly, and this board does not find these comport with the edicts of the Colorado Constitution as aforementioned. And whereas three co-equal branches of government exist in Colorado, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, which each act in a critical check and balance of power to each other. And whereas the governor's use of COVID-19 and the CDEA to purport to suspend statutes not directly related to coping with the COVID-19 outbreak is affront and usurpation of authority of the legislative branch. And whereas the governor, pursuant to Executive Orders 2020-70 and 81, purported to appropriate approximately $1.674 billion to the state of Colorado, received under CARES Act from the federal government by directing as to where those dollars would be utilized. And the legislative branch has the sole authority to appropriate funds for the state of Colorado, and the board is very troubled by the governor's purported attempt to seize the fundamental power of the purse from the legislative branch. And whereas the Colorado General Assembly should have either immediately convened to address the CARES Act funding, should address the CARES Act funding in their current session, or should immediately challenge the governor's executive order in responsibility as a check and balance to the executive branch. Whereas the El Paso clerk and recorder clerk shares in these concerns and has specific impacts to his office as a result of the governor's actions. And whereas the governor waiving of late fees related to motor vehicle transactions by executive order without state reimbursement directly impacts the budget of the clerk who relies on these fees to provide motor vehicle services in El Paso County. Whereas the governor's executive order have made it more difficult for the clerk to make public building, malls, churches, and schools available for voter service and polling centers. Whereas furthermore, many of the governor's executive orders also require the Colorado Secretary of State, SOS, to promulgate emergency rules, which even more directly the clerk. Whereas the SOS's promulgation of emergency rules is an expedited process with little public process and stakeholder input. And whereas the clerk appreciates working with the Secretary of State's, many of the emergency rules proposed or promulgated by the SOS seeks to employ a one-size-fits-all approach for the entire state on election matters of local concern, which are best left to individual county clerks to address as specific to their communities. And whereas while understanding the unprecedented impacts of COVID-19 has had on the state, the board does not find the actions of the governor outlined in this resolution to be a lawful good exercise of the governor's executive authority, and instead believes the governor has taken advantage of the COVID-19 to advance political agendas instead of exercising his authority under the CDA to address the direct impacts of COVID-19 in a thoughtful, prudent, and pragmatic way. And whereas it is further the intention of the board to, when lawfully permissible, join any lawsuits opposing the governor's exceeding his scope of authority to specifically include filing of or joining in amicus briefs. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Board of County Commissioners hereby declares its opposition to any action, inclusive of the executive orders by the governor, which exceed the scope of his authority as the executive officer of Colorado, and hereby indirect and authorize the El Paso County Attorney's Office to continue to monitor the governor's executive orders and any legal challenges as to any of those orders, and appropriately bring to the board's attention in executive session to determine if the board would prefer to take any action consistent with this resolution. Be it further resolved that Mark Waller, duly elected, qualified, and members of the chair of the Board of County Commissioners of Lojinos Gonzalez Jr., dutifully elected qualified member and vice chair of the Board of County Commissioner, be and is hereby authorized and appointed on behalf of the board to execute any and all documents necessary to carry out the intent of the board as described herein, done this 16th day of June 2020 at El Paso County, Colorado, Board of County Commissioners.
All right, that was a lot. Thank you. I wasn't necessarily expecting that we were going to read the whole thing, but I think that was a good thing to do. Appreciate it very much. How about this? Let's go ahead and make a motion, and then we'll have some discussion on it. Who would like to make the motion? Commissioner Williams.
I would move approval of this resolution.
I second.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. Who wants to kick off the discussion? Commissioner Williams?
Sure. So we had talked about this earlier. There's, the governor has amazing powers under this Colorado Emergency Act, and it's been more than a little bit frustrating as each county, from the small to the very largest, and we are one of the very largest, have all been treated the same way. But of greatest concern is his need to interfere in our election process, and the decision to allow petitions to be gathered by email, which is not necessarily the best verifiable method, is quite dangerous. And it is dangerous as viewed by both the Democrat and the Republican Party, because both of them have taken that case, and the Colorado Supreme Court considers it so dangerous that they agreed to hear and read the briefs. The budgetary decisions that he made without speaking to the counties or even the state legislature, I consider to be an illegal act of his power. He needed to have state legislative authority to distribute those funds. Obviously, the religious freedom, those were one of the first things we addressed. I had a political event on Saturday, and that is another right of free speech. And in no form or fashion should he be allowed to shut down a political event that is attempted to be held indoors. We should be able to, as long as we feel safe and we follow the appropriate precautions, we shouldn't have to meet outside it was a nice day, but if it had rained. That is one of our basic fundamental rights there, is political speech and the right to worship. So all five of us have had very well-stated concerns all along, so I appreciate the opportunity to bring these concerns to light. And we do encourage him, while he has done some good things on managing this pandemic, we do encourage him to be careful, because he does overstep the lines.
All right, Commissioner VanderWerf.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to echo Commissioner Williams' comments, very well stated. And these are real issues of concern for us, for me in particular. Some of the things that have been going on as a result of the coronavirus crisis and the emergency declarations with regard to our elections. And also the allocation of funding from the CARES Act, that is the sole jurisdiction of the legislature. The legislature could have been called to order, and a discussion about how to allocate those funds could have been conducted. That would have been the appropriate way to go forward. And in many respects, it's quite possible that the governor would have still been able to allocate those funds in a manner that he saw fit, but the proper process would have been followed. And this is a failure of process here. I think the governor has also taken many unilateral actions that have affected budgets here in local El Paso County. Those are highly problematic as well. And basically, by the time you go through several of these issues, you get to a place where I think we are in a dangerous time about the powers that the governor has, that perhaps the legislature does need to take some of those authorities away from the governor and make some changes to the executive authorities that he has under emergency powers. So I will be voting in favor of this, and I express similar concerns to this proclamation. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Bremer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This resolution is a fantastic summary of all the comments that you've heard each of us make from the dais over the last 3 months. I do think it's quite a coincidence that this particular resolution follows the Juneteenth one we just read. it reinforces our commitment to protecting the inalienable rights that our founders gave to every citizen in this nation, and we are protecting those for El Paso County citizens. I have tremendous respect for the office of the governor, but I equally respect our judicial and legislative branches. And you heard in the resolution that there were several examples of where the executive power has reached over into both of those. I specifically know of several election law cases that ended up in the judicial branch, and I think we will see a few more headed that way from both legislative and judicial. So I am in full support of this resolution, and I think it really highlights really what any elected leader has to keep focused on, a very strategic picture of big picture, long-term effects, and making sure that we are all staying within our lanes, and yet using the powers or presence that we are given to make an impact. And I think there's a way to work within the structure. Our designers of our state constitution were pretty brilliant in that as well. So there is a way for all of us as elected leaders to work within the guardrails of what we're given to truly do great things for the state. And I think that by recognizing where those are, where we can impact the best and most appropriately is key to our moving forward as a state.
All right, thank you. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too will be supporting this resolution today. I believe the governor has demonstrated great overreach in his use of his disaster declaration powers, and I'm concerned he will continue to abuse his authority. If you watched Governor Polis's press conference yesterday, you heard him say his COVID response is a marathon. Also, he stated his restrictions could remain in place until a vaccine is found to COVID, and even stated this could go into early next year. To be clear, yesterday the governor indicated he could keep his extreme executive power in place into 2021. That should concern everyone who places value in separations of power. Let's not forget, this is the governor who has suspended election laws, taken over the power of the purse, a role of the legislature as it regarded to CARES Act dollars, and closed all churches under his disaster declaration powers. I get the impression he's more than happy to keep these powers as long as possible, and I'm concerned it's not about the response to COVID anymore. A strong response is required. That's why, as I mentioned several weeks ago, the county should consider, as part of this resolution moving forward, looking at options, if we're legally eligible to do so, join one of the lawsuits, an amicus brief, friend of the court, if the lawsuit makes sense. I know the Supreme Court is looking at one filed by statewide business groups related to election laws. And so this is just one of many things we need to look at as options, but I am very supportive of this. A pushback needs to be done. Again, I'm concerned that it no longer is about response to COVID, but the governor maintaining his executive powers as long as possible.
Obviously, I too am going to be supportive of this resolution today, and I'm glad that we have worked to get it drafted and get it moving forward. Unfortunately, though, largely this is ceremonial. We don't actually have the authority or the power to make the governor do or not do anything. But I'm hopeful here that he's going to listen, because I believe that we represent the people, and in particular, we represent well over 700,000 people in this state, a huge portion of the state, and I know that our constituents are tired. They're tired of this abuse of his executive authority, and they are ready to get their lives back to normal. I've said it many, many, many times. There are three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. It's not the governor, the Board of County Commissioners, and the health department. It's those other three: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And I certainly believe that this governor has exceeded the scope of his executive authority significantly. And I once again call on our legislative colleagues and our friends up in Denver to say, you know what, Mr. Governor, you've taken too much of our authority and power away, and we have that action, or we're going to take that action against you to sue to say you are stepping on our constitutional authority as the legislative body. As Commissioner Gonzalez pointed out, that's happened with the power of the purse. That resides in the legislative body, but this governor has spent COVID-related funding, like he is an emperor of sorts. That's wrong, and I believe that has exceeded the scope of his authority. I also believe in these emergency circumstances, the authority should be limited by time as well. And that's something that has not manifested itself at all in this circumstance. This governor, again, as Commissioner Gonzalez has said, he may continue this executive authority well into the next year. That's wrong. We should not have an elected leader in the state of Colorado that has that kind of authority to be able to unilaterally make decisions for this significant of a period of time. If things continue the way they are, it could be well over a year. We've got to limit this governor's authority in some way. Now, a lot of folks have said, why don't we just, as the county commission, just do whatever we want? I heard it best exemplified by actually a commissioner candidate up in Teller County who said recently, you know what, if we're to say, hey, you can just open up, do whatever you want, we're basically playing with chips that aren't our own. The problem with that is we say those kind of things, open up, do whatever you want as a business in the city. I'm sorry, Ms. Irvin, you're just a little bit distracting up there. Thank you. We could say, do what you want, open up. But again, the problem with that is that creates liability for whatever entity that is that we're talking to. Creates liability for businesses, creates liability for any sort of religious institutions, and certainly we don't want to have our actions on this board negatively impact them in any way at all. And so we're left with the remedy of doing exactly what we're doing here. We're left with the remedy of passing a resolution saying, Mr. Governor, you've overstepped. It is time to back down from that and return control to the people where it belongs. And I'm certainly pleased and proud to be able to support this resolution today. So with that, I will call the roll. Commissioner Bremer.
Aye.
Commissioner VanderWerf.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That passes unanimously. Thank you.